I used to believe family meant protection until my brother laughed at my tears the day I was diagnosed infertile. At Sunday dinners, he paraded his kids like trophies while I became invisible. But the silence broke when two little fists knocked on my door, rain-soaked and trembling. "Please, Aunt Claire," they whispered. "We have nowhere else to go." That night, I realized motherhood isn't about giving birth. It's about showing up when no one else does. And the man who mocked me? He didn't laugh when his own children begged me for shelter. My father's 70th birthday was an occasion that demanded perfection, the kind of event where everything had to shimmer with performative warmth, where family harmony was dressed in tailored suits and manicured smiles. I arrived early with a small gift, an old-school voice recorder wrapped in soft blue paper. On it was a message I'd spent hours crafting, a poem, a story, a thank you for the man who once taught me how to ride a bike and recite Shakespeare. When he unwrapped it, I saw his smile hesitate. Then came Paul's booming laughter. "What is this? A podcast?" He jeered, raising the device in mock reverence. The others laughed politely, not at the joke, but at the permission he gave them to laugh. I smiled tightly. The recorder was placed aside, forgotten before dessert arrived. Paul entered late, dramatic as ever, with his wife and two kids in tow. They swept into the dining room like royalty, his children clinging to his legs, his wife already mid-story about soccer practice and parent-teacher meetings. The room shifted around him. My father stood up, he actually stood, and said, "Here comes the keeper of the family flame." Applause, a toast, a kiss on the forehead. I might as well have vanished. As the party buzzed around him, I took a seat by the fireplace beneath the family portrait, framed in ornate gold and slightly crooked. I stood and gently straightened it. Paul caught me. "You always fix what doesn't need fixing," he muttered, smirking. I didn't respond. There was nothing to fix that wouldn't break. Later that night, while clearing empty glasses and lipstick-stained napkins, my mother approached me, her arms full of folded tablecloths and judgment. "Claire," she sighed, "you've built a good career, but don't you want more?" She glanced toward Paul's children playing under the table. "Don't you want to be a mother?" I swallowed the bitterness. "Not everyone needs the same things, Mom. But you're not young anymore. You'll regret it. Maybe. Or maybe I'll regret not being seen for who I already am." She walked away without answering. When I returned home, exhausted and numb, I opened my laptop and saw the email. Subject line blank, sender unknown. It read only, "I know what happened back then. The truth doesn't stay buried forever." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Back then? What truth? The next morning, I received another email, this time from Paul. Subject, LOL. The body of the message was short, just one line. Funny how people with no kids always think they know what love is. There was a photo attachment, his kids hugging him with the caption, "Real love." I deleted it without replying. But I didn't delete the first email. That evening, something pulled me toward the room I hadn't entered in months, my mother's old sewing room. It still smelled of lavender and starch, like forgotten dreams pressed between folds of fabric. I opened the closet, pushed past bolts of cloth, and found a small wooden box tucked behind an antique radio. Inside was a notebook, leather-bound, aged, the pages brittle. It was her journal. The entries began in the 70s, scattered thoughts, grocery lists, then gradually confessions. "Claire reminds me too much of myself." One entry read, "She questions everything. It scares me. I see in her the version of me that never survived." I froze. She'd never said that aloud, not once. My mother had always been hard on me, sharp, unsparing. But this voice was scared, not cruel, not calculating. There were missing pages, torn out roughly. I could see the jagged edges, the space where something had been removed. The final entry was dated the same week I'd taken her to the hospital last year. "I need to protect her," it said. "They'll twist everything otherwise." I closed the journal with trembling hands. Out of instinct, I searched through the box again and found a folder, manila, creased, marked with the hospital's letterhead. Inside were legal documents. I scanned them quickly. My name had been removed from the family estate, signed and witnessed, the date stamped exactly 1 day after I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand through a panic attack, and she hadn't told me. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by old fabric and paper ghosts. Something inside me shifted, not broken, not yet burning, but no longer still. This wasn't just about Paul's cruelty or my mother's silence. Something darker had been hidden, and I was finally ready to uncover it. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. I'd woken early, the journal still fresh in my mind, trying to decide whether I should confront my mother or keep pretending I hadn't read her hidden fears. The silence in my apartment was broken only by the drip of coffee and the occasional gust rattling the window pane. Then my phone buzzed. Paul's voice, unfiltered, pouring through the thin wall between privacy and exposure. He was on a call. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the connection must have been misrouted through the family's shared conference line. I froze as I heard his voice, low, impatient, oily. "Just file it under the same trust. They'll never check," Paul said. A pause. "No, my mother's name. I'm still technically on the deed." Another pause. "I don't care what crypto's doing this week. I just need the liquidity." "Claire?" "No, she's out, officially. Long story." I backed away from the screen, stomach lurching. He'd mortgaged our childhood home, using our mother's name. For a digital coin he barely understood. Later that day, I drove to see my mother, my mind a storm of questions and dread. Paul had gotten there before me, of course. He sat beside her, leaning in close, whispering. "She's trying to put you in a nursing home," he murmured as I stepped in. "Claire says it's for your safety." My mother looked up, confused, then afraid. "That's not true," I said, voice trembling. "I never—" "She brought the brochures," Paul said calmly. "Showed me last week." I turned to her. "I didn't. I never would." But she was already sinking into the cushions, tears welling, not because of me, but because she no longer knew who to trust. A week later, she collapsed in the kitchen. I was the one who found her, arms stiff, face slack, eyes wide. I called the ambulance. I rode with her. I stayed overnight in the sterile hum of the hospital while Paul updated his social media with filtered photos of her old birthday party and captions like, "Cherish every moment. Parents are everything." The next morning, the Green Lake Gazette ran a story. "Local businessman rallies support for ailing mother." His photo took up half the page. Paul, smiling at her bedside. I wasn't even mentioned. I returned home later that evening to find a brown envelope wedged into my mailbox. No name, no return address, just a note inside that said, "You need to hear this before it's too late." And a cassette tape. I barely owned anything that could play it, but I remembered the dusty old tape recorder in my storage closet. I dug it out, loaded the tape, and pressed play. Static. Then voices. "You're not taking her," my father barked. "I can't let her grow up in this," my mother snapped back. "Claire stays, or you both go and never come back." "Don't do this." A crash, then silence. Then the unmistakable sound of my mother sobbing. The tape clicked off. I sat in the dark for a long time, fingers clenched tight around the recorder. My mother had tried to leave. With me. And he'd stopped her. The pieces began to fall. Paul hadn't just manipulated the present. He'd rewritten the past. At my mother's house, while pretending to gather her mail, I found another stack of documents. Routine health paperwork from the same day Paul had spoken to his lawyer. In it, buried beneath jargon and fine print, was a form titled Asset Transfer Consent. Her signature was there, shaky, timed within an hour of her medication schedule. I made copies. Then I dug deeper. Paul's 2 children, Madison and Leo, were nowhere to be seen online anymore. Their accounts had gone dark. Curious, I checked the family calendar that my sister-in-law occasionally shared in our group thread. An entry had appeared weeks ago. Camp Valor, 6 weeks, mandatory. I looked it up. Camp Valor was a reform retreat, marketed as a character-building wilderness boot camp, but riddled with lawsuits and abuse allegations. Kids as young as 8 sent there for softness, talking back, Or, according to one mother's blog, crying too often. My chest tightened. I tried calling. No answer. But then came the message. Madison, Paul's daughter, texted from what looked like a borrowed device. "Please don't tell Dad, but I miss you. I'm scared. Can you come get me?" Before I could respond, the message disappeared. Self-deleting app. I only managed to screenshot part of it. That night, Paul scheduled a family video call. He claimed Mom was improving and suggested we all show unity. Madison sat beside him, quiet, face pale. When she shifted to adjust the camera, her sleeve slipped. A dark bruise ringed her forearm. She yanked the fabric back quickly, eyes darting toward her father. I stared into the screen, expression unreadable. But inside, something broke wide open. This wasn't dysfunction. It was generational rot. And I had just found the first root. I hadn't planned to meet Madison in secret, but she asked, and I couldn't say no. We met in the park near the old high school just before dusk, where the swings creaked and the air carried the smell of dying grass. She wore a hoodie too big for her, sleeves covering her hands, eyes flicking around like prey in an open field. "Dad doesn't know I'm here," she whispered. I didn't ask how she got out. I just knelt in front of her and waited. "He hits us," she said flatly. "Mostly Leo. When we ask about you." The words hit harder than I expected. I reached for her hand, but she flinched. "I'm sorry," I said. "This isn't your fault. None of this is." She didn't cry. Just looked at me with that terrible adult stillness kids learn too young. I walked her halfway back, then watched her disappear into the dark before calling a friend in real estate. By the end of the week, I had made the down payment on our childhood home, the house Paul had nearly lost in his frenzy to trade security for speculation. It was poetic, a reclamation of space, memory, and meaning. But I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I needed leverage, not applause. The next day, I received a certified envelope from a lawyer in another city. No prior contact, no warning. It was from Paul's wife, ex-wife now. She'd filed the papers and left, gone somewhere out of reach. Inside was a handwritten letter. "If this reaches you, something went wrong. I couldn't protect them. He watches everything. If I disappear, please, please take them somewhere safe. He lies to everyone, but they trust you." There was no signature. Only a smudged fingerprint and a single line underlined 3 times. "Don't wait for permission." That night, the knock came. It was raining. Sharp, cold rain that fell like needles. I opened the door to find Madison and Leo standing in soaked pajamas, no shoes, backpacks clutched like lifelines. "We ran," Madison said. "Mom's gone. We couldn't stay." I pulled them inside, wrapped them in blankets, made tea that neither of them drank. They slept in my bed. I sat in a chair across the room and didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I contacted the Department of Child Services and filed for emergency guardianship. I was met with polite resistance and thinly veiled doubt. "You've never raised children, Ms. Whitmore." "I've been raising children for 20 years, I said, "in classrooms, lecture halls, office hours." "But not in your home." That was the line. They filed it under review, which meant nothing, which meant weeks, maybe months. Meanwhile, Paul began circling like a hawk. He posted cryptic messages online, vague references to betrayal and fake family. One post read, "Blood is truth. Don't trust actors." He hadn't reported the kids missing. Of course not. That would require exposure. Instead, he knocked on neighbors' doors. He painted me as a childless, unstable woman obsessed with replacing what I never had. And some of them believed him. The whispers began. "Isn't she a little odd? She never married. She just snapped, didn't she?" I felt it in the coffee shop glances, in the PTA meeting stares. Even the barista hesitated to ask my name one morning. I started avoiding eye contact. I stopped going outside. I ordered groceries online. Then one night, I sat on the floor of my kitchen, the kids asleep upstairs, and let the quiet crush me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't know what I was doing. Then the email came. Subject: "You saved my life." I clicked. It was from a former student I barely remembered, introverted, late assignments, quiet voice. The email was long, detailed, painful. They'd been on the edge, suicidal. One of my lectures, on self-worth, on finding power in being unseen, had stopped them from stepping off that ledge. I just wanted you to know. You mattered, even when you didn't see it. I cried for the first time in weeks, not from pain, from remembering who I was. The next morning, I found another envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name, written in red ink. Inside was a single note. The truth hasn't ended. You need to go to your mother's archive before they erase what's left. The archive room in the county records building was colder than I remembered. Fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of filing cabinets and gray boxes marked with names, numbers, lives reduced to folders. It took half an hour of digging through mislabeled inventory, but then I saw it. My mother's name on a beige folder, thick with years and rusted paper clips. Inside, her truth unfolded piece by piece. Mental health evaluations, hospital intake forms, handwritten notes by therapists from decades ago. She'd been committed briefly in 1986, diagnosed with anxiety and paranoia related to familial manipulation. One line repeated across multiple sessions. Patient believes spouse is gaslighting her. My hands shook as I turned the page. In a private memo, her doctor had written, patient attempted to flee with daughter but was returned home by force. Suspects emotional and reproductive coercion. I kept reading, barely breathing. There it was. A clinical report from 1981 confirmed she had been pregnant before me. A planned pregnancy, terminated under pressure from her husband. Not the right time, he'd said. We already have Paul. Except Paul had been born before they met. That was the moment I knew. Paul wasn't her child. He was my father's. From a previous relationship. My mother had married a man with a son, then endured decades of subtle erasure. Her identity, her motherhood, her choices bent around a boy she never bore and never truly accepted. And I, her only biological child, had been punished for being a living reminder of her own rebellion, the pieces locked into place with brutal clarity. I copied everything, scanned, digitized, organized. I wasn't just going to remember. I was going to make it matter. That night, I emailed the files to a journalist I knew by reputation, a quiet crusader specializing in domestic abuse hidden behind wealth and reputation. No flashy headlines, just truth delivered with surgical precision. And then my phone rang. Paul. I let it go to voicemail, but he called again, and again, until finally I answered. His voice was venom. You want war? He said. Fine, but I don't lose, Claire. I don't lose. I didn't reply. The line went dead. The next morning, I packed the kids and took them to a safe house run by a friend in child advocacy. I'd called in every favor, every connection, every ounce of credibility I had left in that town. Then, I met with a lawyer. We built a case, meticulous, airtight, financial fraud, child endangerment, forged signatures, emotional abuse. We backed it with medical records, witness statements, even recordings I'd secretly gathered during Paul's tirades. While the legal wheels turned, I returned to the house I now owned, the house where my mother once dreamed of escape, the house Paul had nearly destroyed. There, in the quiet, I wrote, not a report, not a journal, a book, not a tell-all, but a guide, a story, a reckoning. I called it The Motherless Daughter Who Chose to Mother Anyway. It was part memoir, part manual for surviving families that burn you while smiling for the camera. And when the publisher signed on, they asked if I wanted a press tour. I said no. But a few weeks later, I agreed to one interview. 1. Local TV, prime time. Simple questions. I sat beneath the studio lights, hands clasped in my lap, the host smiling too widely. You've become something of a symbol, she said. For women who've chosen a non-traditional path, what message would you give someone who feels unseen? I took a breath, looked directly at the camera. You're not unseen, I said. You're just not reflected in the systems built to erase you, but your reflection exists, in children you protect, in silence you break, In houses you reclaim, you don't need blood to be family. You just need presence and courage. I didn't say Paul's name. I didn't need to. The viewers did the rest. The footage went viral, not overnight, but steadily. People watched, rewatched, screenshot, highlighted. Speculation ran wild. Forums buzzed, names were guessed, compared, connected. Documents I'd carefully leaked anonymously began circulating in the right circles. My story became more than mine. And that was the point. The book landed like lightning. Not Having Kids Saved My Soul wasn't meant to be a bestseller, but it became one. It moved like a secret too big to stay quiet, passed between hands in coffee shops, left anonymously in waiting rooms, highlighted and underlined by women and men who had never felt seen in any other story. The media picked it up first, local, then national. Articles titled "The Woman Who Became a Mother Without Birth" and "Claire Whitmore, Protector, Not Parent," flooded timelines. Talk shows debated whether society had misunderstood family all along. The public turned their attention to the other side of the narrative. And when they did, the pieces were already in place. Paul was subpoenaed for financial misconduct. The guardianship hearing moved swiftly after that. Child services could no longer ignore the weight of Claire's evidence, nor the quiet roar of public scrutiny. In less than 3 weeks, the court stripped Paul of all parental rights. Claire was granted permanent custody. He didn't show up for the ruling. Instead, he issued a single, scathing public statement. "A woman who failed to build a family stole mine. This is not justice, it's manipulation." But no one was listening anymore. The real reckoning came during a press conference. The publisher had pushed for a publicity event. Claire had resisted at first, but eventually agreed on one condition. It wouldn't be about the book. It would be about what came next. The room was full. Journalists, cameras, flashing lights. Claire stepped up to the microphone in a plain black blouse and jeans, no makeup, no fanfare. She held a single sheet of paper. "This story isn't about me," she began. "It never was. It's about all the children who grow up believing love must hurt. It's about the women told silence is safety, and it's about the places we carry in our hearts when the world has no room left for us." She paused, unfolding the paper. "My mother and I used to dream about a place. Quiet, warm, safe. Somewhere no one could be turned away just for being inconvenient or unloved. That house is real now. The one she was once forced to stay in? It belongs to me. And today I'm donating it as the first location of the Hollow Home Project, a center for children displaced by family neglect." The silence in the room was seismic. Then came applause. First scattered, then rising. After the conference, a man approached Claire in the parking lot, middle-aged, shoulders stooped, hair graying at the temples. He looked like someone chasing something he'd lost a long time ago. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but are you Claire Whitmore?" She nodded, cautious. "I think we're related," he said. She tilted her head. "I'm David," he added, "your father's son, from before he met your mother." Claire blinked. Her heartbeat slowed, then quickened again. "I sent the first letter," he said, "the one about the truth. I didn't know how else to reach you." Twist. The shadow she'd felt for months now had a face. They sat on a nearby bench for nearly an hour. David had been raised by a different woman in a different city. No inheritance, no mentions, just silence. In one photo, a younger version of Claire's father holding a baby boy cut neatly out of the family albums. "I thought I'd hate you," David said at one point. "You got what I never did." Claire looked at him. "You think I got anything?" They both laughed, bitter and oddly relieved. He handed her a letter, written by their father before his memory began to fade. It didn't say much, but it ended with one line Claire would carry forever. She was the only one brave enough to stay. That night, back home, Claire opened a new envelope. It bore an official seal and a gold emblem. "You've been nominated for the Social Change Award, recognizing individuals redefining family and community support across the nation." She smiled. "Not because of the award, but because it would finally be her turn to tell the story loud enough for others to believe in their own. The Hollow Home Project opened its doors on the first day of spring. Claire stood on the porch as the ribbon was cut, not by her, but by two women in their 60s, both survivors of decades-long emotional abuse, who'd never had children, never been believed, never been seen. Behind them stood a line of others, single women, queer parents, teenage foster kids, grandparents raising grandchildren, every kind of family that had once been labeled unfit simply for not fitting. Within a year, the center had served over 300 people. Support groups, legal workshops, trauma-informed yoga, community dinners. They filled the rooms once shadowed by Claire's father's silence. The fireplace burned nightly now, not with fear, but with stories. Stories that began with shame and ended in power. Claire never called herself a director. She said she was just holding the door open. Outside the house, the maple tree that had once stood brittle and barren now stretched wide across the yard. Its branches bloomed deep red each autumn, a kind of private fireworks show for no one but those who had survived enough to see it. The kids, no, not kids anymore, thrived. Madison, now 19, studied sociology. At her university orientation, when asked who had influenced her most, she replied, "My Aunt Claire. She was the first adult who listened when no one else did." Leo was 2 years younger, quieter, but equally fierce. He joined a campus group on child advocacy and volunteered at the Hollow Home each summer. They both called Claire Mom now, not because she asked, but because one day it simply felt right. She never corrected them. Life didn't become perfect. Bills still came. Claire still had days when she missed her mother with an ache that surprised her, and sometimes she'd wake at night convinced she'd forgotten something vital, only to remember that this was how healing worked, in circles, not straight lines. One such evening, Claire sat at her writing desk, the window open just enough to let in the scent of the maple tree, and wrote a letter. "Dear Mom, I used to resent the way you looked at me, like I was too much, too loud, too questioning. But now I understand. You weren't afraid of who I was. You were afraid of what the world would do to me for being that way. You knew because it had done the same to you. I found your records, your story, your fear. I see you now, and I forgive you. But more than that, I thank you. Because everything I've built came from what you couldn't finish. Love, Claire." She folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box she kept beside her bed. Inside it were 3 other letters, one from her student who'd said she saved their life, one from Madison, and one from David, her father's long-lost son who now called monthly, always opening with, "How's my little sister?" The world kept turning. Claire started a podcast. Small at first, just her voice and a microphone donated by a friend. She didn't chase listeners, but they came anyway. In her most played episode, she said, "They used to call me the woman who couldn't have children. Now they call me the woman who raised a generation of survivors. I used to believe biology defined family, but now I know. You don't raise bodies. You raise souls." Letters flooded in after that. Not fan mail. Testimonies, confessions, gratitudes, people who had thought they were alone. One night, she came home from a late community panel, tossed her keys on the table, and turned on the hallway light. Madison was curled up on the couch with a book. Leo was in the kitchen, making popcorn that smelled faintly burnt. "Movie night?" Claire asked. "Only if you pick the movie," Madison grinned. Claire laughed. She walked into the kitchen, tousled Leo's hair, and leaned against the counter. For a moment, the house was quiet in that perfect kind of way. Nothing tense, nothing hidden. Then a small voice called from upstairs. "Aunt Claire, can you tell us a story?" She looked up the stairs to see 2 young kids, new arrivals at the center, peeking down in pajamas too big for their frames. She smiled. "Of course," she said. The light in the hallway glowed warmer as she climbed the steps, a blanket tucked under her arm, her voice already beginning the rhythm of a tale. Once upon a time, there was a woman who thought she had nothing to give, until she realized she had the most powerful thing of all, herself. And the children leaned in, and the house, once broken, once silent, listened.